Okay, thank you everyone for coming. It's not going to be as probably exciting as Ed's talk. We're going from, so Roman strap-ons, we're going from the 1st century now into the 4th and the late Roman military belt and the equipment. Not a lot of background to go into these, but I'll just start with the basics on what I'm going to be looking at, which is, first off, basically what is a strap end. My new typology for these, which we'll talk about the different parts of them rather than them as a whole. Some distribution and chronology, but chronology for these isn't fantastic due to the lack of well-dated examples, expected examples. I'll do a note on the decoration, but that's not what I'm mostly going to go into. And then I'll finish up by talking about some of the types from Richborough and how this came about. So first off, what is a strap end? No contest over this. They are decorations that hang on the end of a late Roman belt. See this example of fittings placed on a piece of leather made into a belt from the Ashmolean. They have some possible functions, but often they are a way down the end or just a decorative piece for the as part of the belt set. So at the moment, I've got a good spread. These are all from Richborough, all these different types. And as it stands, this is how they're mostly categorized. We have these amphoras, you can see why it'd be named that. A lancet or tongue-shaped ones, heart-shaped, it's a fairly obvious reason for that. Proto-Tortworth, these narrow ones, closed lugs here on this one, and a knopped foot. And then the later ones are Tortworth and nail cleaner types with their bifid tongue, zoomorphic lugs. These are ones that were looked into by Hella Eckhart and Nina Crummy. But there is a bit of a problem I find with using this typology when I was looking at the examples from Richborough, and that is it's fairly inconsistent. They're named after shape, function, or the site they're originally from or found from and named after. It doesn't tell you a lot about the different forms, the different decorative styles on them. It's just a general, this is an amphora type or this is a heart-shaped type. So I started to look at the individual elements of these. And I'll go into these individually, but there's the attachment type, the lugs as called by Nina and Hella, which are on the neck, and I'll show that in a moment. The main plate, the main body, shape and size of that, different decorations, and the terminal. These can all be split into these different parts. I'll also be looking at some of the insular versus the continental types. There's been little work in actually establishing the evolution of these types. What features came from continental examples into Britain in the 4th century and developed into the new insular styles that we also see. I'll do a little bit on chronology and distribution, but as I said at the beginning, there's not much to talk about when it comes to chronology, apart from a general 4th century spread, although I've got some thoughts on when they arrive here. So looking at the basic typology, the basic strap end is split into several parts. The head, neck, body, and foot, simply looking at it like a person and where each part falls. These are then divided down. We've got the head shape and the head attachment. That's the 2 rivets on this example, or sometimes a loop, sometimes a single rivet, etc. There's different forms there. There isn't a lot to say about those parts. The main part of the typology comes from the lug shape on the neck, the body width to length ratio, and the foot shape at the bottom there. The decoration comes from either the main body decoration, as you can see on this example, there's the ring and dot decoration dead in the center. There's border decoration, which again, on this pictured one, there's a narrow line running around the edge. That would be the border decoration. And that's different to the edge decoration, which is seen on the very late 4th century into the 5th century types, which is where the actual edge of the strap end is carved. Mostly what's called the chip carved ones, or there's a lot of zoomorphic decoration that we see on those. So delving straight into the main typology, starting with the lugs. These are the 7 types I've identified, plus a question mark for uncertain ones when they're missing. On this example, I've picked the typical, what would be called an amphotype. There's these curved lugs which look like handles. And I'll come on to a bit more what ones are more insular, which ones are more continental. But typically this C3 type here is a continental design, and it's one that's imported to Britannia. Looking at the body width to length ratio, this is how it's taken from the bottom of the neck up down to the top where it would turn into the foot. There are 4 types of these. I split them. There wasn't much reason to narrow these down even more. You've got a 1 to 1.9 centimeter, 2 to 3.99, and then a 1 to 4 centimeter plus. So you get gradually wider and stouter to longer and narrower bodies. There are the heart-shaped examples, one that I showed very near the beginning. There's no reason to go further, divide these further up. There's no rhyme or reason to the shape, the length, the shape of the heart. It doesn't make a lot of difference there, but they still can be included as this form D. Then move on to the foot shape. There's even fewer of these really. You get a knop or button. Again, there isn't really much style between these. They're just very typical small rounded or globular knops at the bottom. Then we got the form Bs, which are the bifid tips, the one that Hella and Nina spoke about in their paper as the nail cleaner types that resemble Roman nail cleaners. And then like pictured here, although it looks broken, this one would have had no separate terminal foot. It would have just ended in a rounded terminal. So that's what would be on this one. And then again, question marks for uncertain examples. What this then gives us is a type. So in this case, we got type C3DAEC, which turned into type 3AC. Because there are 7 different types of lug, it does give us 63 possible types. It seems excessive, but it's only because of how many possible combinations there are. Not all of these exist. There are certain forms that will never appear with certain other parts. So we won't get 63 different examples of strap ends. But furthermore, what it allows us to do is, I've already talked about it, sorry, I meant to talk around to the slide to talk about this, but even without the whole thing, we can do some analysis on them by dividing it up this far. If you're missing a part, if you're missing the lugs, you can still talk about the body and the terminal. If you're missing the terminal, we can still talk about the body and the lugs. Even if you've only got one part, you can say something about it. It separates out some distinctions in the current typology. We're not relying on just calling all of these narrow amphora-looking ones as amphotypes. There is actually some distinction to be made here. And we can analyze the development and the evolution of types. We can look at what styles are developing on the continent, which ones are developing in Britannia, and where they mix and match. And it also allows us to put in the weird and wonderful. And I love these examples because it looks like the first one, someone's just asked for more lugs on it for some reason. Same with the second one there from Norfolk, which seems to also have like a faux bifid tip, like somebody's seen this as a style and has added it to that example, but then they've mixed and matched different lug types. The heart-shaped ones here don't typically have shaped lugs to them. They normally just have a curved neck, no shape to them whatsoever. But one here has got those very distinctive curved handles, and the one on the bottom, from the description of it, has zoomorphic lugs on it, which is just completely atypical for a heart-shaped example. So what the typology allows us to do is actually separate out these oddities and demonstrate how they're oddities. But what does this all mean in terms of distribution and figuring out what is found where, what's continental, what's insular, etc.? Using principal component analysis, by putting in all of the examples where I have all parts C, D, and E present on each type, we then have, we can then split them out. So the red ones being C3, these curved ones that we've looked at, they are typically continental in design. That's where they originate. See, as you go over the graph, you see the C1s, the green ones, are typically insular in design. They don't appear on the continent much. They seem to have developed in Britannia. And then the other big group is C4, which is ones with no lugs, which are just curved sides to the neck. Concave sides to the neck. They are a mix. They seem to appear on the continent, develop there, but are very common and brought over. So they kind of plug that gap or show that development there. Then everything else is a bit of a mix. What we're seeing here is possibly more towards insular designed lugs. Fewer, they seem to incorporate more continental designs on the other parts, so stouter bodies or knopped feet rather than narrower bodies and bifid tips, as we see on the nail cleaner types. And there's a lot more analysis of these graphs, but I just don't have the time to go into every single one in minutiae. That's what I'm writing up at the moment. So looking at distribution of examples, and I should say here, most of this comes from the PAS. COVID seemed to hit just as I was going to really get into the libraries and work on a lot of a deeper look at the excavated data, but there are excavated examples in this distribution as well. We look at the distribution of the lugs first. The C1 circular types tend to be found everywhere. There's maybe more of an eastern leaning, but that could be in a, like I say, PAS bias. But there is a little concentration around Winchester up towards heading into Berkshire, North Hampshire, Berkshire way. The C3, the curved ones, these are the typical continental, what you'd see on an amphora type strap end. Again, central or eastern leaning. They don't seem to, as much as the circular ones, move into the east or the west, the southwest. And then the other big group being no lugs, they are just everywhere. They're east, west, and north and south. It doesn't really matter. But here, one group to concentrate on is the zoomorphic ones, the C6. These are again ones that Nina and Hella wrote about in their paper. There is a definite leaning towards the southwest in amongst a group of these no lug types, and as well a few of the others that are in there as well. Possibly the notches as well, but there's so few of these examples, these others and notches, that there isn't really much we can say about them. But it does seem to be there's an east-west leaning and there's a mixing in the middle somewhere where all of these are being found. Similarly for the bodies, the stouter A examples here, again, maybe there's an East Anglian bias, but it's a definite eastern and central leaning towards these. The Bs, as we get a bit narrower, seem to appear again everywhere. But the very narrow nail cleaner types, the Tortworth and the Proto-Tortworth nail cleaner types, have again a bit more of a western leaning than the others. There's fewer going towards the east and none really heading towards the north, apart from an oddity up there. But again, I need to look at more of the site data on this. And finally, looking at the foot of these, the knob or button, there isn't a lot to really say about the foot really. The knob or button seems to again maybe be a central and eastern leaning to this. The bifid tips weirdly seem to appear quite a lot everywhere. So maybe this is something that was picked up. This was a feature rather than going narrower and zoomorphic with the lugs and the body. This was a feature that was picked up for typically continental styled examples once they were made here. And again, EC, the none ones, again, there's quite a bit of a wide distribution for these as well. As I say, bifid tips, again, maybe there's a few more of these down in the southwest. Small bit on chronology. It's very difficult to establish. Well contextualized examples are few and far between. Sommer has talked about them dating pretty much on the continent from AD 290 all the way into the 5th century, with some nuance there. Some are a bit later than others, particularly what would be called the chip carved examples are very late 4th into the 5th century. So it's not very relevant to Britain, although he's got some examples. He doesn't have many British examples in this corpus. Like the Lankhill Cemetery near Winchester provides some good dating. We've got some AD 350 plus, some 370s. Again, these seem to be restyled continental examples, or they are the Tortworth, the nail cleaner. These are those typical ones that are narrower with bifid tips, or just the narrower examples that are typically insular and probably date to the later part of the century. However, the highest number on one site, and why this led to this really, was Richborough having 33 examples, and really good complete examples a lot of the time. But before I go on to Richborough, I just want to go on to some of the decoration and belt sets. This example from Sommer is from one grave. You can see there's similarities between the belt plate and the strap end. This has been noted before. Belts are made in the fabric or as sets. You get typical decoration across all the parts, and there's a similar design that's used. This comes into Britain in Lankhills. It's probably this one. You've got zoomorphic elements on the buckle, on the actual buckle loop, as well as the strap end, and similar border notched decoration shows that these things are still produced as sets. And the clearest example of this in Britain is the interpreted as the Christian iconography on these, and the horsehead Hawks and Dunning buckles. We see the same decoration on the strap ends as the belt plates, as the buckles. They're still being produced as sets, and even when they're being made in Britannia, they are still made as complete belt sets. There's not just a mix and matching that will do. They are purposefully made. And that brings me on to a little note on the amphotypes, or what was, I wouldn't be formerly amphotypes. Again, from one grave on the continent that Sommer looked at, the curved kidney-shaped belt buckles we get of the earlier 4th century. Again, there's matching designs on the strap and that go with it. There's these curved lugs, whether they're meant to look like amphora or not, but there is a link between the belt and the lugs, though. It's not typically just because they're shaped a bit like an amphora handle. There is a reasoning to it. So finishing up looking at the Richborough typology, this is quite interesting. You've got the curved and no lug examples, which are typically continental or imported designs. They show the majority. They're the majority of the lug types there. There's couple of zoomorphic and a couple of others that it's hard to say whether these are designs from here or designs from the continent, but it is mostly continental influenced at least. Same with the body, much wider bodies trickling down to the narrow ones being ones that are designed, made as insular types. They're not these narrow ones we don't find as much find on the continent as it is. So again, continental influence in the design there. And then finally with the knop or the button, it's fairly even, but again, knop or button or none together would make over 75% of them. Again, more continental influenced rather than the bifid tip, which we find in Britannia, but they are there. These bifid tips are there. Whether this is people moving from west to east, whether this is when the second part of the Second Legion ends up at Richborough and they're bringing those examples with them, is unclear, but it seems that the incoming continental troops that were at Richborough are sticking to what they know. They're recreating their belts in their own image once they're cut off from the supply. And so one final note on I did some, it's admittedly only PXRF, following on from Justin Bailey and Sonia Butcher's work on the brooches. And the PXRF showed that these are mostly bronzes. However, I don't have the graph for it, but all but 3 of these are leaded. Every single one is showing some form of being a made from recycled objects, or have been made to be heavily leaded, rather than the good bronzes and brasses that are coming out of especially the brasses that are coming out of the fabrica on the continent. So just to wrap up, what this new typology does, allows for more discussion of these, the mixing of designs, which ones are typically continental, which ones are typically insular, and which ones are being added together as like a mix and match of styles. I get the feeling that some of the lugs and the wider bodies, the continental ones, stick together. You get the curved lugs and the wider bodies together, but more are incorporating those bifid tips, those nail cleaners, as part of the design. If Richborough is anything to go by, that these incoming troops, because there were Germanic troops, there were Limes troops there, they didn't engage with these new styles to any great extent, whether that's because they didn't move far out of their own area around Richborough and kept to themselves, or that's where they were billeted and garrisoned, is unclear, but they only seem to see the new types when others come into the area, potentially from the west of Britain. There is then a continued manufacture of the belt sets in Britain. It isn't just, I need a strap end for my belt, or even if there is replacements going on, they're probably trying to match design elements that they've already got on their belts. And then like brooches, there is a lot of recycling going on. There's a lot of heavily leaded objects, heavily leaded strap ends, along with the heavily leaded brooches as well. And last of all, the reason I really focused on the strap ends is because the actual belt buckles get a lot of attention. There's been lots of different studies since Hawkes and Dunnings did theirs on particularly the zoomorphic ones, trying to fit them into different typologies, but the belt set as a whole isn't really taken into account, and the strap ends seem to get forgotten, to the point where past studies of them have said there's no real rhyme or meaning to the distribution. But if we start to divide them into their different design parts, we can actually see some significance to them. So that's where I'll leave it. Thank you for listening. It's not as exciting as changing armor from military to a local bracelet type, but that's the where I am with the strap ends at the moment.